Good afternoon. This is Financial Planning for Young Attorneys. My name is George Schoenbeck. I'm an attorney at Sossin and Arnold in Orland Park. I am a co-chair of the Young Lawyers Division's Committee on Professional Development Luncheons. I have with me today my co-chairs, Jessica Durkin and Heather Pfeffer. We're here today to talk about financial planning for young attorneys. This is the first in a series of professional development luncheons put on by the Young Lawyers Division. The next one, mark your calendars, is November 13th. It will be Advice from the Bench, where we will have sitting judges in attendance who will give comments and feedback to young attorneys on the do's and don'ts of practicing in court. Before we get started, I'd just like to recognize a few people in the room. First, we have Paula Holderman, who's the current president of the Illinois State Bar Association.
Welcome, glad you're all here.
Paula has been a strong advocate for young lawyers, and we're very happy to have her here. We also have Jean Keenel and Megan O'Brien, who are the current chair and ex officio, respectively, of the Young Lawyers Division. So let's get to our speakers. We have two excellent speakers. The first is sitting to my left is Kurt Winicki. Kurt is a CPA, a lawyer, and a chartered retirement planning counselor. Kurt received his bachelor's in finance and a master's in accounting from the University of Illinois. He practiced accountancy briefly and then went to Loyola and obtained his JD. He clerked for a federal judge for 2 years and practiced in a large firm for approximately 7 years in corporate bankruptcy and commercial litigation before he transitioned into the financial planning sector. He worked for 2 years in a Wall Street firm, and then in 2009 opened Winicki Wealth Management. We also have, further to my left, Kevin Coney. Kevin is a DePaul graduate in 2005 with a finance degree. He's a chartered retirement planning counselor and a certified financial planner. His firm has 30 years of experience in corporate financial planning, retirement planning, and executive compensation planning. So I'm going to act as the moderator, and I'll ask questions, and we'll have a discussion, and towards the end we'll open it up for questions to the audience. So to start it off, I'd just like to ask, Kurt, we'll start with you.
Sure.
What financial planning goals should a young lawyer begin to implement after law school?
Thanks, George. I think it's really important for people to understand the right goals to set, especially when you're starting out. And it's really different for everybody. If you have a lot of debt, that's certainly going to be a goal. If you want to get married and send your kids to college, that's going to be a goal. You want to retire, your career has to be involved. And so it's really a way to, you want to develop a process to figure out what your goals want to be, and then you have to figure out a process as to how to make the best decisions about those goals. So it's really on a case-by-case basis. What makes you comfortable? What do you really want to accomplish? And what are the resources to do that? And so this entire presentation, I think, is going to be based on motivating you to understand what you need to be doing now and how to develop a plan. And it's going to be different for everybody, but the real basic things are, all right, cash flow, long-term goals, retirement, kids, family, if that's what you want to do, career, all those things you want to get on a piece of paper and start manipulating them around. I think that's the first step. And then all your goals will come out of that. And then once you have your goals, you can start developing strategies.
So in developing those goals, Kevin, how would you look at for retirement? From the perspective of a young lawyer who's just getting out of law school and has gone through several years of education and is just now beginning his or her career?
Sure. From a retirement standpoint, obviously, that seems like it's a long time away. Obviously, people are living longer, cost of living is a little bit more, depending on, like Kurt said, the goals that everybody has. Obviously, there's a lot of things you have to juggle. But one thing that you should consider, obviously, is that retirement. So whether it's carving out a percentage of your income, whether that's 10 or 15 or 20%, at least start some type of savings now, just because obviously that impact of what happens over that compounding effect is unbelievable. So the longer we postpone the retirement, obviously that's going to be a bigger mountain to climb down the road. So if If you work with a firm that has any type of 401k plan, any type of saving strategy, or even saving on your own, albeit a small percentage contribution will really make a larger impact down the road. So I do think whatever type of savings strategy is offered to you, make sure you take advantage of it. If there's a match with a company, make sure you at least save up to that match. I don't want to say free money, but it is. So make sure you take advantage of that.
I'd like to add one thing, and I don't typically jump in, but it's very important to recognize that Albert Einstein called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world. And when the most prolific, intelligent person who ever lived calls something the eighth wonder of the world, you should pay attention. This is how rich people get rich. They understand compound interest. They understand that it can work for you. Oh, Albert Einstein also said compound interest, for those who understand it, works for you. And if you don't understand it, you pay it. And so debt is bad. It can hang on to you for a long, long time. And so we want to understand compound interest, and we want to make the eighth wonder of the world work for you.
So many people think of financial planning as largely focused on retirement planning. But what other considerations should young lawyers take into account? For example, not some people suffer auto accidents and other things that make that path towards retirement not as linear and uniform as they had hoped.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, there are a lot of risks in life, and we can insure those risks, and we can address those risks in a way that makes us feel comfortable, in a way that we can, during our process of assessing these risks, we can figure out how we want to address them. But the first is to recognize them. We've got, in this room, we've got debt, which is a risk to how wealthy we are ultimately going to be. We have career risks. I quit the law because I felt that I was on a path for my own personal strengths could be better used elsewhere. And I'm much more enthusiastic about what I do now than I ever did. So it's important to recognize the risks and the strengths and address them in a logical way. But even logic, your own emotions are going to come into that, and you don't want to discount those as well. So just understanding all the risks is really important. And again, this is all just getting everything on one piece of paper, then you can start making decisions.
I think to add to that, from the risk, obviously, to try to hedge that risk is obviously whether it's what's offered at employers, whether it's the disability coverage, whether it's life insurance coverage, to make sure when you put everything on a sheet of paper, you understand that, gosh forbid, something were to happen, is there enough, obviously, funds to make sure that the other goals that you have continue on. So there's a lot of moving pieces and a lot of moving parts that go with creating a comprehensive financial plan. But one of that kind of the four building blocks, if you will, is that protection plan. And so you can create all these nice long-term retirement plans, all these savings, so forth and so on, but that ends pretty quickly, faster than it's taken you to put all that together in a flip of a hat or whatever the case may be. So more important, I think, than the retirement savings in those emergency buckets is to make sure that you have a solid protection plan in place, whether that's making sure that you have beneficiaries on your accounts, the proper ownership, making sure what works, really dissecting maybe what's inside the employer plan that's offered from a disability coverage. Actually do the math. Walk through those and make sure, when you see that percentage and say, oh, I can probably get by with X amount of percentage of my salary, gosh forbid something were to happen to me. Make sure you can do that math and it still works out. A lot of things happen. Retirement savings will stop. When other to get a little more in depth, it's not just the big accidents. It's whether you, gosh forbid, have a great weekend and you hurt your leg and now you can't get to work or walk to work for 6-12 months at a time, when something major is happening, whether at your firm, and you have to be there. Having that different type of protection is extremely important. Even bigger, I think, than trying to, get the long-term strategy. Make sure you have something short-term too.
So in the event of a disability or other catastrophic event that puts a bump in the road on your path towards retirement, you recommend looking at the coverage for disability insurance provided by your employer. But what happens if you run the numbers and it's grossly insufficient to keep you on to meet your goals? This is to either of you. Feel free to add on as appropriate.
I think when everybody puts all their risks and their goals on a piece of paper, there are going to be some things that you are not going to be able to sufficiently address. Somewhere something's going to be grossly insufficient. And so the whole purpose of this is to develop a plan that best suits you. So maybe, hey, I'm pretty healthy. I don't, skydive. I don't scuba dive. Maybe long-term disability isn't really a higher priority than more life insurance so my kids can go to college if something were to happen to me. And so it's really a way of prioritizing all these different things, and you can run the numbers on all the different ways to address the different risks that you face and the different opportunities that you have. And in that way, you continually develop a plan that personally suits you and makes you comfortable.
There's not much more to add. I mean, again, the laundry list of goals and laundry list of everything you want to cover realistically, like Kurt said, we only have so much capital to try to fund all these goals. So prioritize what's most important to you and make sure you fund those properly.
So in crafting your financial plan and trying to look ahead into the future, you think about retirement, you think about things like disability. What are in terms of positioning yourself and implementing the plan, what are the components of putting that in place in terms of the types of vehicles you should use to save for retirement, what type of what you should allocate to current cash on hand and savings, and anything else?
It's kind of a broad-based question, but I mean, I think one of the how to allocate funds, trying to figure out again that sheet of paper that Kurt and I have been talking about. Making sure whether it's 3 or 5 or 6 months of expenses you at least have for emergency. I mean, that's a broad general dollar amount or monthly amount, but as long as you can maintain your same lifestyle for a certain period of time, whatever you can sleep at night comfortably knowing that you can do, I think that's from an allocation standpoint to make sure that you have enough for the emergency.
And I think your personal situation is going to dictate a lot of that. If you are in a market where a lot of your colleagues are being downsized, that requires possibly a more conservative approach, moving things out of real risky, volatile investments and more into cash and more solid things. And so it's a situational thing as well. Somebody, you have a baby and somebody stays home with the kid permanently. That's a lifestyle change. So the plan is always, it's flexible, and it's always reflecting the situation because your situation's changing. And ultimately, you want to get on a path that you're comfortable with all these projections, and the assumptions are going to be probably pretty inaccurate. But when you run some projections with some reasonable assumptions, you want to be reasonably confident that you're going to be able to retire when you want and not put yourself at risk on the way.
So we've talked about creating a financial plan and the components of it, but what are the first steps? What do you have to do in order to get the tools you need to develop that financial plan?
Well, I always recommend everybody, especially for law students, Personal Finance for Dummies. And the reason I do that is because it's unlike a law book. You don't have to plow through it. It's not like something you have to do instead of going out on Saturday night. It's a cartoon book, but it has all the basic things that you need to know in very general terms. It is not beyond the grasp of, obviously, anybody in this room, but the normal people who don't even have educational backgrounds like yourself. So that's a great first step. And that book, or any of these books really, will walk you through the process. And hopefully we meet our goal by motivating you to actually pick up one of those books and actually start the process. Because the sooner you do it, the more comfortable you're going to feel, the better plan you're going to have, and the more efficient your money's going to work for you.
I agree. I mean, to find a research book like that or something that keeps it simple, that's going to be your best route, whether to dissect a little bit more and maybe create your own net worth statement or your own income or cash flow statement and track that recording of of the expenses that you have. I mean, I think taking a deep dive or understanding the top level of, the retirement or the finance for dummies, and then start to actually put that in work, put that to practice. Track yourself maybe on a quarterly, or set yourself up and say, all right, every quarter I'm going to check how my net worth is. It growing? Is it decreasing, and why? Did I buy a new house, or did I have some other family medical emergency or some issue, or has it grown really well? I think to take that step, like Kurt said, understand, do a little research, and then also start implementing that by whether creating a net worth statement or income and cash flow statement.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's not because I'm an accountant. It's because accounting, these very basic accounting financial statements are imperative to every single business. And if you consider your personal finances as a business, you're probably, over 40 years, you make $100,000 a year. It's $4 million that's going to come into your possession somehow. Maybe taxes you'll never see, but you're going to be paying enough of those that you'll get it. You own a little company, and that company is you and your family, and that's your business, and you have to understand it like a business. And these two, I think Kevin answered the question better. The first step you have to take is understanding your net worth, where you are, and if your debt is real big and your assets aren't, you're going to have a large negative net worth right now, and that's okay, because then you go over to the income statement, which is how much you're going to be able to bank every year. You're going to take your income minus your expenses, what goes out the door, and that surplus or deficit is your cash flow. And so these two financial statements are absolutely imperative for you to understand where you are and get a good way to project in the future where you're going to be and how you're going to get there.
And George, could I ask a question? So Kurt and Kevin, you're talking about putting together, your own financial statement, which I get. So let's say you do that and you figure out, so you're a young lawyer, you've got law school debt, and at the end of the day, basically, you really don't have any extra money to put aside for whatever your goal is. Let's say it's buying a house. And you have this large law school debt. Are you, in terms of like the whole compounding of interest, are you better off continuing, obviously, to pay that law school debt, and maybe pay more of your law school debt? Or should you try to, put $20 aside for the mortgage as opposed to maybe an extra $20 to the law school debt? So I guess what I'm asking in terms of the compounding, are you better off letting your law school debt compound and saving, or are you better off putting more into your law school debt and getting that done with and then starting?
That's a great question, and it really is. I don't mean to go around the bush.
Yeah. We have, for our viewers who are looking at this via YouTube, the question was, how should...
Do you want me to go ahead and repeat the question?
I'll summarize it. The basic summary was, so we talked about these financial planning goals and how to look at it, but we haven't yet gotten to the point in the presentation where we consider debt. Many of us in this room have large amounts of law school debt. How should these financial planning goals be balanced against law school debt? For instance, when you're trying to put money aside for retirement, for disability, for these other risks, and to satisfy your goals, where does satisfying your debt fall into that?
So,
and could I just make it a little bit more immediate than retirement? Because, I mean, just looking at the average age in this room, I think it's hard for people to grasp retirement. But it is perhaps a little bit easier that you would like to have a house in the next couple of years. So could we use that, more of a short term?
Sure. So from a short term perspective, obviously to save for the house or to pay off the student loan, and it realistic. I mean, don't mean to beat around the bush, but it is really a case-by-case basis. Take a deep dive into your student loan. Make sure that they're getting the lowest interest rate you can on it. Make sure that they're consolidated. There's a lot of, based on your income level, if you're just starting off, there's a lot of, you can give a call or make a call to the loan and ask them, hey, my income's not as much as I was anticipating. Can you work with me a little bit? Not that they're going to reduce your loan balance, but they might be able to adjust the payments for the next year or next 5 years. Granted, you back end the overall loan value, but at least it gives you some flexibility to get yourself off your feet and so forth and so on. So I think interest rates is to make sure that you're doing the best you can, and to say, should I pay off all my student loan, then go on to the next task, if you will, or next goal. I think you really have to you have to split it. You have to make sure you're paying enough, obviously, the student loan to make sure you're current. Obviously, that student loan's not going away. In fact, you probably, if you elect not to pay it, it's even in bankruptcy. I mean, we know that obviously it's still going to be there. And if you collect Social Security someday, that your Social Security will be reduced by what you forgot to pay 20, 30 years ago. So make sure that you honor that debt. And then from the goals, if we tackle that interest rate or that student loan too long, we're going to miss out on that longer term compounding effect. So you have to split your eggs in a couple different baskets.
One of the, I wholeheartedly agree, and it may sound like we're being wishy-washy up here, but it's really personal. And you can go through the numbers and you can logically say, well, I expect over the long term, even though in a volatile market, to make 7% long term and my debts are 5%, so therefore I should probably invest rather than pay off my debt. You have to weigh the risks and the rewards, and also how comfortable you are doing that. You also have another goal of being able to sustain your cash flow if something were to happen. So you've got a competing goal with all that of building up some sort of reserve, or maybe even if it's in this sort of situation, that you've got credit card availability. So if an emergency happened, at least you can make it through 3 months or 6 months or whatever is appropriate for you. These are really difficult questions. And you can put things on paper and you can mathematically find the logical answer, but things happen in life and we need to understand more about ourselves, what makes us comfortable. Some people abhor debt. Some people will not buy a car unless they can pay cash for it. Other people, they're mortgaging everything, they have tons of debt and they're fine with it. So whichever end of the spectrum that you're on, you just have to see an end game for the debt. The sooner you can knock that out, the richer you're going to be, the more things you're going to be able to do. And there's a slide in my planning presentation in December 2012, Chicago Tribune. The headline was credit scores a deal breaker. People are now looking online and figuring out who they're dating and what their credit score is, because they are literally avoiding people who have bad credit scores and a lot of debt. We're talking about compatibility. We're talking about knocking people out of the dating box before they even get going. This is really important, and I just thought that might be impressive.
Do you have a question?
Hold on. Sorry. Need if you have questions, please just raise your hand. I can bring you the mic. We can't get it on the video without the microphone.
So I just had a follow-up question for Kevin. You mentioned in talking about answering the last question about consolidating your loans, and that's something that I feel like a lot of recent graduates are pushed to do. But I've also heard that there are certain circumstances when it would be disadvantageous to consolidate. So could you kind of tell us when you would want to consolidate and when you wouldn't?
Sure, that's a good question, and it is a case by case basis. So whether the terms of that student loan that you have, maybe it's a higher interest rate or lower interest rate, I think looking underneath the hood and understanding the time frame, the amount, I think that's to your point where, it'd be silly if you had a lower interest rate and try to consolidate to make your life easier to a higher interest rate. Then you're going to have to be a little more strategic and be your own CFO and make sure you pay those amounts accordingly. But there are points where you may not want to consolidate it because of the terms and because of the interest rates, I think, would be one of them.
There are, sorry, one last.
Does that answer the question?
There are a lot of programs. We did a debt conference at the CBA a little while ago, and the professional was talking about all the different ways to consolidate your federal loans and your other loans. There's a lot of stuff out there. I'm certainly no expert, but it would be wise to look at that. And the second thing is that a lot of these programs go out 20, 25 years. So understand that $10 pizza is going to cost you $42 when you're paying it off 25 years from now. I was hesitant to put that in my slide, but half the programs, the consolidation programs, have those sorts of timetables. So it's just another reason to have a plan and to address that.
So in discussing debt, we've been talking about how to balance debt against your other goals, but we're in an unprecedented situation in the practice of law in this year and in recent years, where we have a number of people graduating, coming out of law school with large debt loads, who have no career opportunities, and many of whom either are underemployed as law clerks or who open their own offices and can't make sufficient income to balance their own lifestyles. So, I mean, it's less of a question of balancing and more of a question of where do you put the limited income you have once you get past taking care of your basic necessities. Do you have any insight into that situation? How those people in that situation should look at their careers in general, and also look at how to handle allocating what limited discretionary income they have.
Right. That's a challenge too. I mean, obviously, coming out and starting a first year or in the first phases, and maybe the salary that you have isn't sustainable enough to honor all these goals. It comes back to me keeping your ears and eyes open for other possibilities. Maybe it's an extra, whether it be a weekend job or whatever the case may be. I mean, as long as if you're trying to accomplish all these, you might have to make some short-term sacrifices for trying to maybe keep actively looking for a new occupation or a different role or responsibility that might help you out. But these short-term struggles or these short-term, extra efforts of extra part-time jobs or extra whatever the case may be, I promise you will pay off in the long run.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think on the career standpoint, you really want to understand your own personal career. Whether you can make it being an associate at a huge law firm for 20 years, basically going from associate to of counsel, understand how you're going to generate business, how your career looks 10, 5, 15, I know that's not in order, 5, 10, 15 years from now. Understand where you're going. And reach out and network and talk to those people who have done the same thing. Where you want to be in 10 years, call them up for coffee. Call your alma maters. People take you out to the Metropolitan Club for lunch to give you advice. Lawyers love talking about themselves. So use your networks, use your professors, hook up with people who you think you want to be there. Ask them what they love about their job, what they hate about their job. Ask them about marketing. There are a lot of attorneys out there, 5, 6, 7 years, don't have their own clients. I didn't have my clients. I found myself in a precarious situation, and ultimately, when I left the law and I started financial services, a financial services career, I didn't know anything about sales, and everything's about sales. I mean, I'm a nice guy, personable, and it got me through interviews, but I don't know how to sell, or it didn't. And so it's a discipline that everybody should understand the very basic techniques and the very basic goals of selling. And if you've got a few extra hours a week, I would highly recommend going to sell cars, getting a job to supplement your income, selling legal services. Once you understand that, you are going to be much more in control of your own clients and your own careers.
So, continuing in this vein, many young lawyers, as we discussed, aren't going to firms, aren't being hired as associates, and straight out of law school, they start their own practices and operate as solo practitioners. What, from a business perspective, in terms of establishing their firms, what are the things that those young professionals should be thinking about for their businesses?
Well, I think I'll just follow up on the prior point, marketing. It's like if you don't have any clients, you're not going to survive. And if you don't have a marketing plan that you're going to be disciplined about, you're not going to get clients. And that's really the number one thing that I would suggest. Obviously, you want to keep expenses low, but you need a marketing plan. Coming from someone who didn't have one, it helps.
I think that's a big point. I mean, having a marketing plan, just like you had a strategy through school. I mean, we have strategies and ideas and goals. I mean, the same thing for the company. So you have your own personal CFO, and now you have a CFO of you know, your own personal company, if you will. So the same concept that you created the net worth, or you created the assumptions for your own personal CFO, I would do the same thing for your own new company. But you know, the marketing strategy, whether it's and then working with an accountant or working with somebody to help create some type of saving strategy, whether it's creating a 401k or creating some type of contribution or retirement contribution plan, I think that's important. Reducing expenses, I think, are also important. Again, realistically, you're going to be the CFO now for 2 companies, and so you have to make sure you spend time in both of those areas.
And one last thing, I want this to be a happy presentation. Everyone out there has got issues and they need to be addressed. But everybody in this room has an education that the vast majority of the worldwide population and in America would envy. And so we need to take that education and figure out, we got into this stuff, right? We knew what debt was. We knew a little bit about compound interest. We understood what we need to pay, and situations might have changed. So what do? It's like, who moved my cheese? Go out and figure out where the cheese is and go get it. We are too smart in this room to not take advantage of our education. This should be an income premium to you every single job you get, because we're smarter than most other people who are going to do similar jobs regardless of what field we're in. And so be motivated, be happy. We accepted this debt. We accepted this responsibility. It's not going away. Let's make the best of it. We're all smart.
So Kurt, are you suggesting as to people in that situation where they don't have enough income to perhaps follow a career path similar to yours, where you jumped ship from practicing law into something where you felt you was more lucrative to you and more satisfying given your personal skill sets?
I think it's ultimately going to be more lucrative because it is more satisfying. And I'm passionate about what we're passionate up here. We love what we do. We love coming here and talking to people. And as a corporate bankruptcy attorney in a tower, that wasn't me, and that wasn't fun. And so you're going to do a lot better if you're passionate about what you do. I highly recommend What Color Is Your Parachute? I highly recommend talking to people, and it wasn't until I broadened my network and started talking to people outside the law that I figured out this is what I wanted to dedicate my life to. And if I didn't open myself up and start asking really good questions of non-lawyers, I wouldn't be as happy as I am today.
So to a more happy topic, we talked a bit about the miracle of compound interest and how great it is. And I think we all know and have learned at some point in our careers that the earlier you save, the better off you'll be down the road through compound interest. So attorneys in firms and who establish their own 401ks and other retirement vehicles through their own practices are confronted with a variety of options. How much should they set aside for retirement in the firm's 401k? Should they consider extra IRAs or other tax-deferred accounts in some fashion? And as we've discussed, we know that's all a matter of preference. How much do you want to save? But what's the philosophy of approaching and looking at and analyzing your firm's offerings, and then also considering supplemental vehicles? And what are those supplemental vehicles?
Well, it all depends on your income level. Obviously, there's different ways to save short and long term based on your income, based on your well, I guess from a 401k or from a company standpoint, make sure you're at least, like we mentioned earlier, make sure you're at least going up to your match contribution. That's, again, free money. Make sure you're doing that. At least try to do that, and then back to the conversation about the debt. At least you make sure you maintain that responsibility. If you're able to save more after the debt continues to decrease, or the payments are getting a little bit less, or they're fixed and you're almost your home stretch, maybe start ratcheting up your retirement savings. When you get a raise, let's say it's 2 or 3 or 4%. Maybe it might be advantageous to take that 2 or 3% raise that you might get and split that and say, all right, of that 3 or 4%, maybe 2% I'll pay more towards the loan for now, and maybe an extra 1% I'll go towards retirement, or I'll bring that home and build up my emergency bucket. So I think allocating to those certain buckets really help out, but make sure you leverage the different retirement plans. After you finish up your 401k, maybe do a Roth IRA. based on your income level. Maybe do other different features. You know, there's a lot of that. That's a whole very broad topic, but at least you're doing a couple different buckets. But I think adding more to the, depending on the interest rate, depending on the terms, obviously, but maybe when you get those raises, maybe beat down that loan a little bit faster for 6 months or 12 months, and see how that impacts the long term. It might drop off 3 or 4 years of that student loan. Well, gosh, once that's off, we can really start accelerating other type of saving strategies.
Yeah, I'd just like to add that there are debt calculators out there, and I've developed one that I freely give out. It's not posted on the website, so you'd have to contact us. And that we've got some resource pages at the corners of the table that have like the books that we recommend and the debt calculators. And so exactly, they will calculate, hey, if I increase my monthly payment $100, where does that move my payoff year? It moves it from 2028 to 2024. Or whatever. So you can mess around with those and see how it impacts it. I think it's really helpful.
So we talked a little bit about Roth, the concept of a Roth, and could either of you explain that designation and what it means to when you walk into your new job and the office manager says, do you want to elect to have a Roth 401k or a regular 401k? And if you have extra discretionary funds and you're looking at IRAs as a supplemental retirement savings vehicle, what does it mean in that context?
Go ahead.
Sure. So from a 401k typical, it's always pre-tax, so the money's not taxed, and then obviously it grows tax deferred, so you don't pay taxes while it's growing. And then when you retire, the money that you take out is obviously you withhold for taxes. So there's that not getting taxed up front and letting that grow to a bigger nest egg, and then theoretically you'll be in a lower tax bracket when you retire. So you'll be able to kind of avoid the taxes now. The Roth 401k is a new provision that they put inside there that says, okay, I don't want to do the pre-tax, and I think maybe taxes might go up down the road or whatever the case may be. So the Roth 401k is completely opposite than the pre-tax. So this is after tax. So once you make, you get your payroll, you'll see the deduction, and then you'll pay taxes on it now. So you've gotten the tax issue out of the way, and then it grows tax-free. You can't touch it to your 59.5, but at least you pay the taxes at the start and let that grow. So it all depends on, where you think tax brackets are going to go, where you're personal, whether you're single or married filing jointly, whatever the case may be. The Roth 401k did become a newer issue because of that, because of the tax where people project taxes will be. So pre-tax is good. I mean, you can maybe do 5% in each in the pre-tax and in the after-tax or the Roth 401k. It all depends on your situation and what your 401k provider offers.
I think Kevin would have made a great attorney because he prefaces everything by it all depends, which all attorneys love, right? But it's absolutely true, and it does depend. And the one of the dependent factors is your current income tax rate. And so a lot of times when we're starting a business and have a ton of expenses and the income is down, or we have a dual income family and one of them goes back to school or takes time off work, those events sometimes lend themselves to contributing to a Roth in a low tax bracket, in a low current tax bracket. So if you have an event going back to school, low income, and you still have the wherewithal to put money away, those events are something to watch out for. If you're like, okay, I'm really going to be in a low income tax bracket this year, take advantage of that if you got the means to do it.
So really, with a traditional 401k, you put in money before tax. So when you may earn the money, it goes into the 401k without any tax. Interest on the funds that are inside the 401k while you're working develop tax-free. And then when you take it out after you're 59.5, then you pay taxes as ordinary income?
That's correct.
Okay. Whereas with a Roth, you pay the taxes up front. The money inside the Roth grows tax-free, correct?
That's right. And then everything comes out tax-free. And so what it really does is it helps you avoid the capital gains tax, which is 15% or higher. Because you're only going to pay on a traditional 401k, you're only going to pay income tax when you pull it out at retirement, hopefully at a low income tax bracket. If you didn't contribute to the 401k and you invested that money, you would pay income tax now, and then as that money grew, you would pay capital gains tax of at least 15% going forward. So at least in the tax deferred accounts, you're going to avoid the capital gains tax, which is one big benefit. And the other big benefit is for a lot of people, we kind of need help saving. We kind of need it to be automatic coming out of our account. And if we don't see it, we can't spend it. And that helps, I think, the vast majority of people save.
So, as President Holderman indicated, young lawyers have other goals besides retirement at this point. We all know that it's probably prudent to save for retirement, and if I start earlier, it's better. But there's more pressing needs on the horizon. For instance, a house. Many of us are starting families and want to move from an apartment to a home and need some money for a down payment. And others are considering a partnership buy-in and need some funds in order to be able to do that when the opportunity arises. So, in putting aside funds for those goals and in allocating them to make sure they're there, what do you recommend in terms of how to ensure that those funds, once they're put to the side, grow at a sufficient rate and earn a decent rate of return?
The biggest thing is to determine the time frame of when you're going to need this money. If you're going to need this money, and if the buy-in of the partnership is in 12 months, if it's in 2 years, or if it's in 6 or 7 years, I think working with somebody that can give those projections or give you investment recommendations based on the time frame. If you're able to take a little bit of risk for a couple years, or if this is something you're going to need short term, then you have to be more conservative with that money to make sure it's there in 12 to 24 months or 36 months, wherever it may be. I think it all wraps around the time frame of when you're going to need that money.
Yeah, 2008 taught us, if it taught us one thing, it taught us that people who need money in a few years shouldn't be in the market. The market doubled, and then the tech bubble burst, and it got cut in half. And then it doubled on the fraudulent mortgages, and then it got cut in half again, and now it's doubled. Now, I'm not saying there's a pattern, but there's a possibility that it gets cut in half from here. Nobody's got a crystal ball. And so if you need something in the short term, you don't want that getting cut in half between now and the time you need it. So investing is a long-term proposition. We need to be able to accept and be comfortable with the huge fluctuations in the U.S. and in other markets. And that's how we can take advantage of compound interest. It's not a straight line, unfortunately.
So if I, as a young lawyer, if I'm in a position where I'm contemplating a partnership buy-in in 5 years, and I'll need a large chunk of cash for which I'll have to save, regularly and save diligently. If in that 5-year horizon, maybe the market isn't, and I'm assuming you mean stocks and bonds and liquid or securities, is maybe a little volatile. Where would you, what alternatives would you consider?
I like CDs. They'll probably give you 1% over, 5 years? I think the liquidity and the protection is key here. If you've got $80,000 or you're going to save $80,000 over the next 4 years, and that's when you need the $80,000, I think even bonds with interest rates going up, I think that's all relatively problematic.
The same thing, it is struggling. It is, unfortunate interest rates are obviously relatively, low historically. So those CDs that you might not be earning any return on, at least the principal is still there, so that in a couple of years that money truly will be there. I'll circle back to the time frame and to, whether it's a challenging task, I guess, or a challenging topic to determine whether it's U.S. markets or international markets, to determine when that time frame is going to be. I mean, it's up to your own emotions and then up to your own willingness to understand how the investment works.
And switching over the same concept for long-term retirement planning, in analyzing investments and assuming that you don't have a non-market alternative available where you're investing in real estate or something like that. And looking at the markets and looking at securities and other CDs and things like that, how do you look at structuring the money you put aside for retirement for young lawyers, late 20s, early 30s, where retirement is 30 plus years away?
Well, I think the expectation is that we're going to accept some risk that over the long term we are going to be rewarded for, but we can reduce a lot of that risk by reducing the risk of large losses through diversification. It's the reason that we don't put 100% of our stuff in Enron, and we don't put it 100% in Groupon or Google or Apple or anything that seems awesome today. So by the same token, maybe 20 years ago, we didn't have access to global markets. We've got access to global markets, and we can get into those very efficiently. And when we get into global markets, we can we can reduce the volatility of being tied to the U.S. market, which, as we know, doubles gets cut in half, doubles gets cut in half. That's a bumpy ride. And hopefully through diversification, we want to zig in some areas while the U.S. market's zagging in other areas. And if things don't walk in lockstep, and often they do and often they don't, but we want to reduce that risk as much as possible. Over a long period of time, we expect that everything's going to be up significantly 10, 15, 20 years from now. And we want to take advantage of the market crashes when we can, and we do that through diversification. And then finally, always understand every fee you pay when you're investing.
Kurt brings up great points. I mean, I second all the comments.
So we have a question.
Thank you. My name's Quinn Donnelly. I'm currently a law student, so my perspective may be different than some in the room, but you guys seem to be talking about a lot of situations where, in my experience, there are kind of infrastructural boundaries or barriers, say to setting up a CD or investing or taking advantage of opportunities that can, in essence, make you money. What if you're at a point where you don't necessarily have enough money to take advantage of those interest rates because of minimum balance requirements or other kind of account structure things? I mean, how do you start out from that point and build your way up to take advantage of the opportunities that can really be more lucrative in the long term?
I mean, it's going to be, if you have the checking and back to the basic 101, if you have a checking and savings account and building up that savings account, even if it's at one point you're going to need to meet that minimum, whatever that minimum might be at whatever institution, but maybe carving out, have your own personal retirement plan or personal short term and carve out money from your checking that automatically goes into your savings to build that up to a certain amount that you have, whether that's 4 or 5 or 6,000, and then reach out to from friends or family that have worked with, an advisor or whoever that they feel comfortable with that can lead you onto the right direction to start that next phase of saving into, markets or whatever the case may be. But I think back to the old school checking and savings and letting that build up to a comfortable level.
I think it's all about behavioral habits. It's like if we get into a habit early enough that we save instead of spend, and we appreciate that we can buy a house a lot sooner, or will be more attractive to somebody. If we save rather than spend, then we can really, if we really look at what that means, then we can mold our current behavior so that we can act in a way that aligns with what we really want to accomplish in our life. There are people who grew up as teachers and plumbers who are so much more wealthier than dual income attorney doctor families. They are just so much wealthier because they formed habits early on. They understood what they needed to do. They were frugal and not silly, and they get it. And if they can do it, everybody can do it. Mm-hmm. And it's just choices and behavior.
Thank you.
Another question over here.
Well, it's actually not a question. It's somewhat in response to this thing.
And I'm sorry to keep interrupting, but so when I was quite a bit younger, and I was in the state's attorney's office, so I obviously wasn't making a lot of money. But we started doing some programs in the office about financial planning and saving. And so I sat down with a guy, and so we went through the whole thing of what do you have coming in and what do you have going out. And for instance, he was pointing out something as simple as if you go to Starbucks every day and have a triple latte, whatever, and it's $5. If you didn't go to Starbucks every day, it'd be $25 a week, which would be $100 a month. And if you started saving the $100 a month into, some sort of savings, as opposed to having the latte, that would start to build up. And when he made that like small example, it just really helped me a lot. And so I did start following his advice, and it has been very helpful. So just small things.
One of the habits I learned in law school, because I was on a budget, was the $2 lunch. And that habit, actually, I've got a $4 lunch today, 16 years later. And there are two reasons for that. One is I don't really need $8.50 worth of food, and I will eat it if I buy it. And the second is, it may not be medically supported, but if I only put $4 of garbage in my body, I probably won't die that much earlier. So that's my philosophy. But it started with a really good habit out of necessity in law school, and I don't just need $10 of food every day.
It's an interesting diet concept. May have some,
Works, sort of.
May have a marketable idea there. I want to ask one last question to both of you, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience for questions. Tell us. We talked. You've been up here giving financial advice this whole hour, and this is what you do on a daily basis. Tell us how you assist young attorneys and other professionals in your everyday work, and what services you provide to people who seek your counsel.
Our practice specifically focuses on comprehensive financial planning. So whether it's a pre-retiree or retiree, that's what we do. So we essentially kind of walk through some of the topics and some of the strategies that we talked about, net worth statements, and kind of going through evaluating the protection plan, evaluating their savings strategy, both short and long term, evaluating their taxes. We kind of build it into kind of the four cornerstones of financial planning. So making sure it's not just about that investment. It really is about how to manage, helping people manage through that debt, consolidating the debt, or maybe not consolidating it based on the interest rate. So all the things we talked about, from whether it's the taxes, whether it's the short-term savings, long-term savings, that's essentially what we do on an ongoing and annual basis. I think the biggest thing to reiterate is it's just not being your own CFO. Make sure you pay your debt, and then second, make sure you pay yourself, and pay yourself for your time and your efforts, and that's so you can get rewarded down the road. I think that's a big thing.
Kevin and I operate in similar businesses. We are fiduciaries, which is a really important term in this industry. As attorneys, somebody walks in your door, wants to hire you, the first thing you do is say, hey, I've got to clear a conflicts check. Oh, well, we represented the other side of this contract last year. You've got to take your $1 million elsewhere. Conflicts of interest are so important in your profession and in the medical profession, and it is that important in our profession. And yet the majority of advisors are unlike Kevin and I in that they have no fiduciary duty to act in your best interest. And so it's important to understand the concept. You can certainly go to a Wall Street firm or a bank that has that can sell you things not in your best interest. And if you're fine with that and you trust the person, that's great. But understand the concept. And one thing that we find with young attorneys, I imagine Kevin would find similar things, is people come to us and they ask what to do, and after we develop somewhat of a plan, it's like, okay, you've got to tackle your debt, and then you've got to build your liquidity, and then you've got to save for your house, and then if you've got some other things that we can work with, maybe in a year or two, we can come back and talk about how to maybe invest this stuff. As a fiduciary, that's sort of our responsibility. It's like, we got to do what's best for you first, and then if there's an opportunity to help you on the investment side, we're certainly capable of doing that. But a lot of people are from, oh yeah, you've got some money, we can invest that, and that's the start and the end of that discussion.
Great. I'd like to thank both Kurt and Kevin for coming in today and giving this presentation, and we'd like to turn it over to the floor for any questions.
Thank you.
Kurt, you just touched on this a little bit, and I've been hearing, and I think some of my colleagues have as well, from financial advisors who reach out to us realizing that we're young attorneys and getting paid for the first time, ever, and that we might need some financial advice. And I've had phone calls from 3 or 4 different people, met with 1 or 2 of them. How would you advise us? What advice would you give on going through that process and deciding who we choose for a financial advisor? What sort of criteria should we look for? What would be important for us in sort of making that decision as to, who to take guidance from? I mean, apart from choosing one of you two, obviously.
Of course. On the resource handout, the Department of Labor puts out a fact sheet, and it says there's one factor you should consider pursuant to this fact sheet about when you're hiring a financial advisor. And that it's interesting that the Department of Labor doesn't say, hey, here's 8 factors, trustworthiness and all this stuff. They say there's one factor that everybody should consider, and it says you want your advisor to act in your best interest. So the Department of Labor understands that this is a huge issue, that people are confused about it, and as attorneys, we're one profession that shouldn't be confused. So from a basic standpoint, if that person can't give you a document that says, I will always act in your best interest, I will always put your interest before ours, I am paid only by my clients and not by other sources, if they are not willing to sign that document, the Department of Labor says, find somebody who will. And that's the most important thing, according to the Department. I shouldn't say most important, but that is the one distinguishing factor that the Department of Labor says is really important. The other is obviously personal connection. I think people love the people they're working with, and they trust them, so they get referred. But that's probably not a great way to figure out if that's the best person for you.
Didn't work for those who went with Bernie Madoff.
No, it didn't. And there was a lot of referrals coming into that shop.
Question for Megan O'Brien.
Hi. What is the best thing to do with a 401k from a prior employer that you can't roll into? It's not an option to roll it into a new 401k.
So obviously, depending on what type of 401k, whether it's you have an old Roth or a pre-tax, I mean, you're going to have to work and roll that into an IRA. You could take, because we're all under 59 and a half, you have to understand the consequences, the penalties for taking a distribution earlier than 59 and a half. So you're probably going to have to work with somebody to roll that over into an IRA. By doing that, again, back to what this gentleman said about who do you roll it to, or who do you transfer that 401k. It is, ask friends and family who they have worked with, meet with that person, make sure that they do have that fiduciary responsibility to act in your best interest, not just, their best interest. Make sure that you have a good connection with that person, that they contact you on a frequent basis. Understand not only just that investment, but your kind of holistic approach or everything about you. That's going to be your best bet. Mm-hmm.
It's hard because everybody who does what we do are pretty likable people. So you're going to run into a lot of people who are just pretty likable, and it's tough. There are basically 3 options with an old 401k. You can leave it there and understand what you're paying and the funds and whether you're comfortable with the funds and any you're not going to get an education if you've separated. So you can leave it there. You can roll it to an IRA and manage it yourself. And I don't know, Schwab, or I don't recommend anybody, Schwab, E-Trade, all these different brokerage houses are perfectly capable of helping you with that if you want to do it on your own. And then there's the advisor route. And so on the advisor route, obviously, one thing to make sure is that if you're doing it retail and you're not using no-load funds and stuff like that, a lot of times using an advisor is actually less expensive because they have access to no-load funds and stuff, and the retail public doesn't. So again, it comes back to understanding what you're paying and what you're getting.
Quick follow-up. What happens when you withdraw funds from an IRA or 401k before you reach age 59 and a half?
Nothing good. You're going to get hit with the income tax on the year that you pull it out, and typically that's a cash flow problematic year, which is why you're hitting your retirement funds. And so when you pull it out, come April of the next year, you're going to have to pay whatever your income tax rate is on that. And so you may want to set that aside, or you may, just understand that there's another bill that you're going to pay in the next year. And if you're not 59 and a half, you get a 10% penalty. So long-term savings, there are great benefits, but you have to be liquid enough to keep that stuff in there long-term.
All right, thanks to everyone for coming out today. This concludes our presentation.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.